Have you ever wondered why fashion shows spend billions arranging fashion shows to advertise clothes you can't even buy? And even if you could buy the clothes, it would probably make you a victim of ridicule and possibly give the police an excuse to arrest you for indecent exposure. On the surface, it's an utterly absurd phenomenon, but there is, of course, a method to this madness. If we ask the fashion houses publicly, they would probably say it is to experiment with new fabrics, colors, and shapes, and maybe something about expressing the essence of the brand. These answers are not exactly wrong, but they aren't the main reason. The main reason is a phenomenon known as perceived obsolescence.
Perceived obsolescence convinces us to throw away stuff that is still perfectly useful. How do they do that? Well, they change the way the stuff looks. So if you bought your stuff a couple of years ago, everyone can tell that you
The phenomenon is also known as obsolescence of desirability or stylistic obsolescence, and it refers to when designers manipulate your current understanding of what's contemporary design and make it seem out of fashion. The fashion industry is probably the industry with the most aggressive perceived obsolescence strategy. To make your fashionable sweater seem hopelessly out of fashion, it's not enough to launch it in a new color or with a smart little bow. You must be bombarded with style expressions that look like something from the future, especially if you are part of a consumer segment willing to spend a lot of money to be in the sweet spot of the fashion cycle, and from where fashion trends trickle down to more mainstream consumer groups. The x-axis, which here describes how long it takes for a piece of fashion to be perceived as stylistically obsolete, has, by the way, fallen sharply in the last couple of years.
I think I've gotten to the point where I just don't underestimate how quick fashion can be and how relentless the cycle is.
The mechanisms behind perceived obsolescence are a cornerstone of the advertising industry. It's one of many strategies where corporations try to manipulate and devalue your self-worth and your stuff by making you and your stuff seem socially and psychologically less valuable.
We see 3,500 of them a day. And the majority of them basically tell us you suck, and if you don't buy this product, you're not going to be rich enough, smart enough, hot enough. And so we walk around being told 3,500 times a day how deficient and lame we are.
And this is what I would like to emphasize, that the advertising industry's secret message. It's not just about overselling products and services, it's also about devaluing your self-worth and your possessions. This applies to everyday products. For instance, if you want to sell a fabric refresher, tell your potential customers that their home stinks. It also applies to more obscure products. If you want to sell an online money and masculinity course, make your target audience even more insecure about the masculinity and whether they earn enough money to be real men.
Women, beautiful women, love misogynistic men. When you see a 19-year-old Ukrainian on a billionaire's yacht in Dubai, is she complaining that he's the boss and he's in charge?
Some will probably argue that this isn't how all advertising works. I do of course agree that there are some ads here and there that don't work exactly this way. Some ads are also difficult to interpret, with this iconic Cadbury ad being a great example. However, here we must remember that if we want to tell people that the clothes are hopelessly out of fashion, that the homes stink, and that they aren't masculine enough, advertisers need to either sugarcoat their language or disguise their intentions. People and governments can react quite strongly if a message is not delivered with enough subtlety, which this British protein manufacturer got a taste of in 2018.
Take a look at this ad. It made big waves from the US to the UK. Now the City of London is banning it.
And a marketing message can really be delivered subtly. A great example is Sony's Bounty Bowl commercial from 2005. It almost looks like all Sony has done is signing a performance artwork with the logo. However, the ad intended to highlight the superiority of LCD screens in terms of color rendering. In other words, to tell the viewer that the TV sucked. Advertising generally works this way because it's a narrative genre. Like all narrative genres, it follows established narrative structures. Fairy tales mostly start in some incomplete or disharmonious state. Here, a duckling or a princess can, for instance, be unaware of their inner beauty or true destiny. The incomplete state sends them on a long and dangerous journey, and they discover who they really are along the way. In Hollywood films, you typically get a small glimpse of the harmonious life, but then the war is announced, the daughter is kidnapped, or the supervillain strikes again. Then the hero of the story once more has to embark on a long and dangerous journey to bring harmony back to the nuclear family, the American suburb, or the old continent. Advertising structures are simpler. They usually start with an incomplete or disharmonious state. However, the hero usually doesn't have to go on a long and dangerous journey. The journey is replaced by a so-called Deus Ex Machina, Latin for God in the machine. A Deus Ex Machina refers to a sudden, magical event, object or character that turns a hero's problematic situation upside down. With a very literal example being the Axe or Link spray turning geeks into sexual gods. An advertisement will typically try to enhance the horror of the disharmonious state or enhance the magic of the Deus Ex Machina. However, amplifying is not the only option. Advertisers can also soothe bad consumer conscious. That is often done with labels for good animal welfare, low calories, etc., etc.
Some of my favourites, some of the ones I use all the time, I'll use Farm Fresh. I'll use 100% natural. I'll use Butcher's Choice. But what does that really actually mean? Well, truthfully, it doesn't mean very much.
Like Sony Bravia's Bounty Bowl commercial, the soothing of bad consumer conscious can be done with an almost artistic kind of flair. Take Apple, which in the late 90s was almost bankrupt, but then started its journey towards becoming the world's most valuable company. They especially did so by targeting a consumer segment that traditionally defined themselves as anti-consumerist. One of the strategies was to put a link between Apple users and revolutionary figures from history. Thus, they gave hippies an excuse to buy an expensive computer and turned this anti-materialist mass into the hipster, one of the more materialist consumer segments of the 21st century.
Honors those people who have changed the world. Some of them are living, some of them are not. But the ones that aren't, as you'll see, you know that if they'd ever used a computer, it would have been a Mac.
Another thing that makes this narrative structure particularly compelling is that it can be used interactively. The incomplete state doesn't have to be in the actual ad itself. This incomplete state may be the situation you are in when you see the ad. By timing, when and in which context the ad is shown, there is a great probability that advertisers know what mood you are in. You could be in that kind of mood where you're dying for snacks, which is why the before mentioned Cadbury ad actually makes sense. You could be bored to death or maybe even depressed. The palette of incomplete and disharmonious states is rich and varied. That the advertising industry is aware of how effective timing and context is can be found in the expression soap opera. That expression dates back to the 1930s when soap manufacturers started to sponsor melodramatic radio dramas aired when housewives were home alone and applying elbow grease and chemicals to make their homes shine, anxious if their homes shone as much as the neighbor. Targeting ads at stay-at-home housewives with various cleaning products may be innocent enough, but what about the possibilities today's technology offers? For instance, Meta's Facebook and Instagram platforms.
They're able to understand what I'm looking for, what my financial, emotional, personal, career level desires are. They're monitoring your internet activity. They're able to harvest all of that information by virtue of you using their platforms to do anything.
Then it becomes a more serious ethical issue, especially since Meta has been caught using algorithms that amplify negative emotions several times because people caught in negative emotions click on more ads.
Facebook has realized that if they change the algorithm to be safer, people will spend less time on the site, they'll click on less ads, they'll make less money.
This secret message is probably also a bit of an open secret. You're probably quite aware of these tricks, and there are many references to the empty feeling ads often leave us with in pop culture, with the most accurate example I can think of being this Matt Haig quote. "The world is increasingly designed to depress us. Happiness isn't very good for the economy. If we were happy with what we had, why would we need more? How do you sell an anti-aging moisturizer? You make someone worry about aging. How do you get people to vote for a political party? You make them worry about immigration. How do you get them to buy insurance? By making them worry about everything. How do you get them to have plastic surgery? By highlighting their physical flaws. How do you get them to watch a TV show? By making them worry about missing out. How do you get them to buy a new smartphone? By making them feel like they're being left behind. To be calm becomes a kind of revolutionary act. To be happy with your own non-upgraded existence. To be comfortable with our messy human selves would not be good for business." Although it's an open secret that advertising aims to devalue your self-image and your stuff, it's probably a good idea to think more about the influence of advertising. We are bombarded with ads like never before, and today's many platforms and business models make it harder to tell when something is an ad. The power of advertising also raises political questions. Should governments do more to limit their influence? Is it most of all an individual's responsibility? Is it even realistic to decrease the impact of advertising? Don't companies also have freedom of expression just like individuals do? And advertising also finances freedom of expression by paying for platforms such as YouTube. It has done so since the 18th century, when the first newspaper ads were printed. I like some of these anti-consumerist takes, where you put the responsibility on the consumer, here expressed by journalist Michael Pollan.
Don't eat any foods you've ever seen advertised on television. And it turns out that almost all the food, about 80% of the food you see advertised on television is for highly processed food. Real foods, the kind of foods being sold here, they don't have the budgets to advertise on television.
However, whether such a take is enough to deal with the growing diabetes and obesity epidemic is questionable. In particular, I find personalized ads worrying. But perhaps the technology can be turned on its head, so it's the consumers who decide manually which kind of ads they want to see and which kind they want to avoid. But what do you think? Should advertisement be more regulated? If so, what kind of regulation will actually work? Are you doing something active yourself to shield yourself from the influence of advertising? I'm actually curious about those questions, as I think the topic of advertising is filled with many tricky dilemmas.